Okay, we're continuing with the book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom, quotes by me, Pete Rogers, going in alphabetical order. We're on the letter F. We're doing quotes about freedom. This first painting here is Patrick Henry in 1775, where he gives the great give me liberty or give me death speech. Okay, it's magnificent. And it also shows you the kind of guys who founded this country. They were Christians. They were macho men. This was noble masculinity. Many of them were preachers. This is before the 503 days. This is before the Catholic Church was taken over by lightweights, alcoholics, homosexuals, pedophiles, and all these wimps. And, you know, good smart men, married men, they're not even allowed in church, okay? You should be having the smartest, best men in society preach at church instead of all these lightweights, okay? It's just a fact. And that's why men don't want to go to church. Okay, the church has been infiltrated by the Antichrist, and it's become weaker. The Catholic religion is great, but the church has been taken over by people who are against the church. Okay, here's just another quote, just a warm-up for Patrick Henry. It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here. Right, everybody wants to move to a Christian country. Hardly anybody wants to move to a non-Christian country. In non-Christian country, other people are not welcome. Okay, it's only Christian countries where everybody can get along. That's a unique feature of Christian countries. In other countries, they don't want the other people there. They don't. And sadly, the goodwill of the Christians has been used against them in all the Christian countries in the world that I'm aware of. They're all being destroyed right now. They're all having, tyrants, and big money has, used its influence to open the, for us down south, what that is, the border, and just overrun these countries with people who are hostile to freedom and destroying the places, okay? And you need to talk about it. The reason you've been, brainwashed with all this culturalism stuff is to get you to surrender to it. And everybody's been feminized to surrender to it because it's not in the best interest of the country. All right, so next one here, we'll go through his real speech. Well, first of all, another couple quotes by Patrick Henry. He said, "It is when people forget God that tyrants forge their chains." It's the same thing that Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. He says, the reason why 65 million Christians were killed in Russia is because they had forgotten God. If you don't have God, you don't have unity, and you can't do anything, and then there's no rules, okay? If you want, they can eat you as cannibals, okay? Once you get rid of God, you have no rights, you have no rules, okay? It's just a fact. Patrick Henry, the Bible is worth all the other books that have ever been printed. All right, so now let's go through the Patrick Henry quote. He said, "I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. It is natural for man to indulge in illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. Are we disposed to be of the number of those who have eyes but see not, and have ears but hear not? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst and to provide for it. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Okay? That's the personality of the founding fathers of this country. They weren't a bunch of pussies. They weren't a bunch of guys saying we should all, bend over and take it up the behind, open up, all the borders, let England turn us into slaves. No. They said, this is our country, no taxation with representation. Okay? That's what made America a free country. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about, these are quotes related to freedom, a little bit about ancient Greece. And you got to remember, ancient Greece, there's a seesaw between Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle is the great one. Plato did a lot of wonderful things for philosophy, but Plato, deep down in his heart of hearts, was incredibly pissed off that Athens had lost to Sparta. And he started to have doubts about Athens and wonder if maybe we should be more like Sparta, because they won over Athens. Athens had really sort of started the war. Pericles back in his day, high and mighty. Okay, so Plato. The people have no understanding, and they only repeat what the rulers are pleased to tell them. Those who tell the stories rule society. And that gets back to the allegory of Plato's cave. But Plato did not respect the common man. And he felt that you just have to treat them as inferiors and give them a little bit of limited information to control them. He called it the noble lie. All right? And that's another reason why Arthur Herman wrote that book, Between the Light and the Cave. And basically, the cave is Plato himself, and the light is Aristotle. To some extent, Socrates too, but Socrates, to some extent too, was really a mouthpiece of Plato. All right. Okay, Plato continues. The first thing will be to establish a censorship of the writers of fiction, and let the censors receive any tale of fiction so they may review it and determine which is good and reject the bad. And we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized stories only. Yeah, he wants to begin brainwashing kids right from the cradle. Okay, that's Plato. That's why if you know people who really know history, like Schopenhauer and others, he's like the least liked of the ancient Greeks amongst the real scholars, okay? Because Plato was he was drifting into becoming collectivist. He also believed in eugenics. He said you should only breed the good athletes with other good athletes. You should only breed smart people with smart people. And the smart people should be having a lot more kids, not all the stupid people. So Plato was big on eugenics and collectivism, okay? So Plato was seen as a little bit of a precursor to communism, all right? And another thing of concern about all that is there's two major streams of Christianity. There is the stream that goes from Plato to St. Augustine to Martin Luther into Protestantism, okay? And it has a tendency to lead into secular tyranny. And then the other strain of Christianity is ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, okay, the Italian Renaissance. Catholic leads to much better life on earth than Protestantism. And Catholicism is able to maintain, even though right now it's been infiltrated, the papacy, and the new pope is another antichrist like the last one. Catholicism at least gives you a hope of a decent life, and you can enjoy a lot of things. I've seen it. I've seen the Catholic schools, the Catholic parishes. I know what they're like. When they're run by good people, they're magnificent. Everybody is as happy as they're going to be. And there's freedom, there's opportunity, and everybody can be themselves. Okay, George Orwell. All fiction and nonfiction too, Georgie, is censored in the interest of the ruling class. Yeah, censorship is basically what the powerful people don't want you to say. Okay, so it has nothing to do with true morality. It all has, like on the internet, all this stuff about misinformation. What that just meant was the rich people were pissed off you were saying that. So you can't say something that pisses off rich people. It's just a fact. Okay, whenever there is an enforced orthodoxy, good writing stops. Yeah, if a writer's scared to write something, then how are they going to write anything good about it? Orthodoxy for the proles is unconsciousness. Yeah, most people, they really haven't thought out their philosophic positions. They just accepted what's around them as self-evident. Plato continues, when a tyrant first appears, he is the protector. Yeah. Plato, democracy passes into despotism. Yeah, that's all from Plato's Republic. And, Alfred North Whitehead had said all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato. Plato's Republic is magnificent. He wanted to be a playwright. He failed at that. He wanted to be a politician. He failed at that. But then he became a philosopher, and he wrote in the form of a play with these dialectics between Socrates and other persons. And they're very entertaining. They're very well written. They're brilliant. Okay, but in the end, Plato caved to collectivism and sort of a Spartan-esque prelude to communism. And Plato was a big time elitist, okay? So, anyways, some people say, Nietzsche had said that Christianity is Platonism for the masses, okay? And what I would say is, the church was around a long time before the Bible. And there's a lot of stuff to Catholicism that's really good. It's not all just Bible, all right? And it lets people live a happy life. There's controversy about all kinds of church dogma. There's no controversy about the message of Christ, and that's what really matters. Okay. All right. Now we're going to give you a little bit from Victor Hansen. He's a scholar of ancient Greece. He's written a lot on these topics. His book, Who Killed Homer, is quite good. Okay, so here's one thing I like. He says, Greek wisdom was not Mediterranean. It was anti-Mediterranean. And Edith Hamilton had wrote something similar. Basically, almost every single country before the ancient Greece was a crap hole, okay? What people don't understand is slavery is normal. Slavery is the standard of a society. This idea of a free society, the modern Christian West, it's only a short little blip on the historical, timeline, okay? The vast majority of countries have been slaves and serfs, and it looks like we're headed back in that direction, unfortunately, so hopefully we won't go that way. But just so you know, yes, the ancient Greeks had slaves, but they also had a large free aristocracy. Okay, and they were more into freedom than any other country. In a typical country in those days, they were flat countries, and one ruler, dictator, would just control for many, many hundreds of miles all the people, and they all had to behave the same way. They couldn't, be different in thought, different in art, different in writing. Nope, they had to all conform to standard, and that's why they don't do anything interesting or creative. People think pyramids are great. Pyramids are built by slaves, a little triangle on the ground, okay? That's nothing compared to the Parthenon, compared to a cathedral, okay? You're not allowed to change Egyptian art for thousands of years, or some, tyrant dictator will kick your butt, okay? Versus, you let free men create stuff. They create beautiful things, okay? All right, so he continues, Victor Hansen. Hellenic culture was not just different from, it was entirely antithetical to any other civilization of its time. Institution and ideas deriving from a Hellenic core of values have shaped the modern West and must therefore be examined if we are to understand and manage and correct our own lives. Yeah, everybody should know the ancient Greeks because they teach you like what's good about mankind. They were magnificent. There's nothing like the ancient Greeks, in the 300s and 400s AD. There's nothing like them. They're the most interesting culture you'll ever study. Okay, Victor Hansen continues. Hellenic culture first gave us rational scientific inquiry, often organized into proto-universities and published and read through uncensored media. Freedom of speech and permissible dispute of religious norms were also Greek ideas. They made it possible for the unbeliever to keep his head on his neck. To ignore or destroy the classics of ancient Greece and ancient Rome is to commit cultural suicide. The Greeks assumed that culture separates us from our natural savage selves and that no culture did this better than their own city-states, like Athens. Okay. He continues, Victor Hansen, pride in one's culture was not chauvinism, but simply a logical and necessary appreciation that required sacrifice and responsibility from the individual citizen, and in return gave him material bounty and personal freedom undreamed of by others. Yeah, and that's like the closing of the American mind in that book where they talk about it's normal. Every society has pride in itself. And people have to have pride in themselves and their own culture, or they won't maintain it. It'll go extinct. Okay, Victor Hansen continues. The assumptions in Sophocles' Antigone, where she said, before King Creon, there are laws of the gods which are above the law of man, therefore I must do what is right. In that scene is where she was burying her brother Polynices that King Creon had declared should be left to the dogs. Okay, and then he imprisoned her and he actually killed her. But the purpose of the play was to say Antigone was right, and that's how people should behave. And Creon was a jerk, and Creon suffered in it because of that. His son loved Antigone, and his son committed suicide. And then when the son committed suicide, the mother committed suicide. So Creon lost his son and his wife because of his cruelty to Antigone and him being so unreasonable. And that was the lesson of the play, that the laws of the God should be above the laws of man. And that's what's great about Christianity and society, too. You have an outside appeal. There should be something above the ruler such that there are checks and balances in the society. Otherwise, the ruler has total power. They become like a god on earth. And when they get that total power, as they did in the ancient Romans, the emperors, they almost always abuse it. Most of them did. Not all of them, but most of them did. They'll want things like a concubine every day and other things, In ancient Rome, some of the emperors, if they thought a woman was attractive, they would just kill her family and take her and make her into a sex slave. That's it. No discussion. And they used to call those pearl hunts. They would send their soldiers to go do that and bring her back. And that's how brutal and cruel Rome could be. And I just tell you that because that's actually normal for dictatorships all through the history of the world. And so the West is very naive. They don't understand. Christianity is not just going to heaven, hopefully, after you die. It's about having freedom to walk down the street in society. It's about not being subject to all this sort of capricious behavior of a secular ruler who's declared a god. People don't understand. There's only this small of a distance between us and savagery and return to a third world barbarism. And you should be grateful for all this ancient Greek stuff and the Italian Renaissance stuff and Christianity. Because what it says is it says that you're a person, you're creating the image of God, you're worth something, your life has meaning. You're not just, livestock owned by a ruler. In other countries, the people are just livestock owned by a ruler, okay? And it's just a fact, it's not This is well known. Anybody who knows history knows this, but the average American doesn't know any history, so they're like, oh, how could you say that? I'm like, if you've accepted atheistic Darwinism, you've accepted the fact that you're just a talking monkey, and talking monkeys don't have freedom. They don't have free speech. They belong in a cage, okay? That's where they're put, okay? And that's how the ruler views you. So unless you are created in the image of God and something special outside of the other animals, then why should you have any rights at all? I mean, that's how this stuff works in a society. I wish more people understood that, and we'd be more free if they did. Okay, Victor Davis Hanson continues. He says, the ancient Greeks were not merely different from the other cultures. Rather, they illustrate the reasons why we in the West are what we are. The most important legacy of the Greeks and Romans is this uniquely Western urge to pick apart everything, every institution, tradition, and individual. Only in this matter do ideas change at all, and only this way does an author find any credibility with the reading or listening audience. Cynicism, skepticism, parody, invective are all Greek and Latin words, a rich vocabulary of public and private dissent, unequaled in non-Western languages. Okay, so basically what happened with ancient Greece too is they had a bunch of little city-states, and there were a lot of hilly, mountainous areas, and there were a lot of lakes and rivers and oceans, seas separating everybody, so that the Greeks would travel all around the Mediterranean and adjacent areas, and they would trade with other cultures, and they would learn from the other cultures. Because it was hilly and mountainous, the terrain was not flat. It was difficult for any one dictator ruler to control everybody. In some other big flat country, you could have 1,000 square miles where one dictator controlled everybody and all made them behave the same as slaves. Versus in ancient Greek, these hilly, mountainous, Highlander type people, hard to control them, and they had their individual opinions. And by far the most intellectual was Athens. Athens was the place. It was the intellectual place by far. Like Edith Hamilton had said, for the other countries, their greatest mythological hero of ancient Greece was Hercules, the brute, strongest guy ever. But for Athens, their hero was Theseus. He was much more intellectual and subtle and thoughtful. Okay, the next quote is from William Gass. He's an American writer. He said, "The censor pretends he is protecting the tender hearts, shielding children from sex and violence, keeping the righteous path, preserving virtue. But how does he do it? By burning books, by threats of violence, by tearing out tongues, through torture and imprisonment, feeding the people a false and wicked philosophy, used to preserve his privileges and to hoodwink the world." Yeah, censorships, somebody saying they're protecting you from misinformation. They're not protecting you from misinformation. They're limiting what you are allowed to know or what you are allowed to say. Okay. All right, Ayn Rand. The good can be achieved. It is real. It is possible. It is yours. So long as there is no censorship, there is a chance for persuasion to succeed. Yeah, censorship's a big deal. Freedom of speech is the most important thing. People should be allowed to say whatever they want. You don't have to agree with them. They shouldn't be allowed to, they shouldn't be able to just walk into your business and say it, but they should be allowed to say whatever they want on the streets. They should be able to write whatever they want on the internet. Ayn Rand, true scientists are essentially loners. They pursue knowledge for the sake of knowledge. A scientist who discovers knowledge and shares it to benefit others is the greatest benefactor of mankind. But such men are not considered heroes. Such men should be considered heroes, but such men are not regarded as heroes. They are the most hated, blamed, denounced men in such so-called humanitarian societies. Yeah, the more truth you tell, the more trouble you get into. Okay, so you can only tell so much. And you have to use a fine line to judge that. And that's a sign of a bad society when people get in trouble for telling the truth. And then scumbags and liars and weasels are rewarded, okay? And USA has gone too far down that path. Hopefully it'll recover from that. But I think it's only going to recover if it goes more Christian. And it doesn't look like it's going to do that or that's going to be allowed. So I don't know. We'll see. There's new hope. We'll see. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. As long as there's breath in me, I will try to hope for the best and increase freedom and free speech if that's possible. Adlai Stevenson, my definition of a free society is one where it is safe to be unpopular. Okay, Samuel Gompers, freedom of speech and freedom of the press have not been granted to the people in order that they may say things which are pleasing. The reason they have it is so that they can say things which displease. Yeah, they should be allowed to say stuff we don't like. Okay. Freedom of the press is guaranteed to only those who own one. Okay, here's a Polish guy, philosopher from the 1900s. He says, there is one freedom on which all other liberties depend, and that is the freedom of speech, of print. If this is taken away, no other freedom can exist, or at least it would soon be suppressed. Henrik Ibsen, the pillars of truth and the pillars of freedom, they are the pillars of society. Yeah, how can you work towards the truth if you can't speak freely? Okay, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. The history of intellectual growth and discovery clearly demonstrates the need for unfettered freedom, the right to think the unthinkable, to discuss the unmentionable, to challenge the unchallengeable. To curtail free expression strikes twice at intellectual freedom, for whoever deprives another of the right to state unpopular views, necessarily, that also deprives others of the right to listen to those views. Okay, we're almost done here. Eric Hoffer, unless a man has the talents to make something of himself, freedom is an irksome burden. Yeah, most people don't care about freedom. Most people, want to get their money on payday and then go get drunk. Okay, well, if you want to live like an animal, go ahead. It's okay. It's your choice. But, we got a brain. We get only one life. Might as well do the most you can with it. Oliver Wendell Holmes. But also, that reminds me, though, freedom is a burden for a lot of people, but also having no freedom is a burden, okay? If you look at people who grew up in communist countries, lots of men are alcoholics in communist countries, tons and tons of them, because they have no hope. There's nothing they're allowed to do, so they just get bored and say, we might as well get drunk. Okay, Oscar Wilde, man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. Yeah, I think let people have secret identity on the internet, but, you should be able to delete them from your YouTube channel if they're acting like jerks, but free speech is good. It's worth the price, I would say. Oscar Wilde, it is through art and through art only that we can realize our perfection. Through art and through art only that we can shield ourselves from the sordid perils of actual existence. Oscar Wilde. He continues, no art ever survived censorship and no art ever will. Yeah, censorship is powerful. It just shuts up things. Just like the great nutrition doctors are all censored from conventional medical books. George Orwell. The atmosphere of orthodoxy is always damaging to prose, and above all, it is completely ruinous to the novel, the most anarchical of all the forms of literature. Okay. Edith Hamilton, the great scholar of ancient Greece and Rome. She said, the Greeks said all things are to be examined and called into question. There are no set limits on thought. Freedom was born in Greece. That's a big statement, and that's an important one. Freedom was born in Greece. You want to see freedom for mankind? Study ancient Greece. It's the greatest thing. All the other ancient cultures, in comparison, they're pretty boring. They're pretty brutal. And Rome, had a lot in common with dictatorships. It was more of an Eastern type dictatorship than it was a Western free place. There was some freedom, there were some really great guys like Cicero, but Rome is brutal and cruel and unreasonable in comparison with ancient Greece. Edith Hamilton, responsibility is the price every man must pay for freedom. John Stuart Mill from England, 1800s. Persons of genius are a small minority, but in order to have them, it is necessary to preserve the soil on which they grow. Genius can only breathe freely in an atmosphere of freedom. Yeah, a genius is going to be far ahead of other people in their field of expertise. And because of that, they're going to say things that don't fit conventional opinion in their field. So if you don't allow them to talk, you're not going to get much progress, okay? By definition, a genius is somebody who transforms a field, meaning they're going to say stuff that is not considered common or accepted knowledge in that field. Okay. And John Stuart Mill, he's a real brilliant guy, but he's also a bit of a weasel. He wanted freedom for the English to do whatever they wanted, the English aristocratic men, but he didn't want freedom for the Indians. People in India. He didn't want freedom for the Irish. Okay. So on liberty was like on liberty for Anglicans from England. It wasn't on liberty for everybody. Okay, Milton Friedman. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. And that's what the United States is doing right now. It's destroying itself. But a society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. Yeah, nothing's ever perfect, but at least you'll have those things, okay? Terence Coulter. The method of the dictator is not so much propaganda, but censorship. Yeah, very common. George Bernard Shaw. All censorship exists to prevent anyone from challenging current conceptions and existing institutions. All progress is initiated by challenging those conceptions. And sometimes those institutions need to be supplanted. Consequently, the first condition of progress is the removal of censorship. Yep. Okay, Voltaire. If there had been censorship of the press in Rome, we should not today be reading the writing of Horace, Juvenal, and Cicero. Yes. Okay. Thank God Cicero saved his books. If you only study one Roman, Cicero is by far the best of all the Romans. He's the greatest of all Romans, by far. He was magnificent. He's sort of like what Aristotle was to the ancient Greeks. Cicero. Cicero stands even higher above ancient Rome, because ancient Rome is kind of a big mess, whereas Aristotle stands above all ancient Greeks. But there's a lot of great ancient Greeks, lots of them. Okay, Potter Stewart. Censorship reflects a society's lack of confidence in itself. Yeah, people censor when they know they're bullshitting and lying, and they don't want people to know the truth. William Sims. The dread of censure is the death of genius. Okay, how's a guy going to write a novel if he's scared to, put his pen to paper? Jonathan Swift. Censure is a tax that a man pays to the public for being eminent. So anyways, those are the quotes about freedom. I hope you found that interesting.